Hey friends, welcome to Skeptics and Scoundrels. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome my new subscribers to the channel and thank you all for your patience between my last video and now. I spent a few weeks doing some international travel. I went to Japan, awesome place. And then I had to deal with the following jet lag, catching up with life and work and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Thank you for your patience. Also, I want to give a massive shout out to my very first patron, Ben. I hadn't even set up my Patreon tiers yet, and I logged in and Ben was already signed up with a custom monthly donation. Thank you so much, Ben. I hope to live up to yours and everyone else's expectations. And with that, let's go! Demons, spirits, apparitions, bugaboos, stories. These are tales crafted to explain the strange and random noises we hear in the darkened night, to give an account as to why migraines happen, why certain individuals will be perfectly fine one moment and thrashing on the ground, frothing at the mouth the next, and why some wake up in the middle of the night, unable to move their body and experiencing the terror which naturally follows. And for the longest time, these stories were humanity's best attempt at an explanation for the unexplained. Demons lurking in the unknown, invisible boogeymen, as far back as the Paleolithic or Stone Age, until eventually they fell under the employ of religion. This turned the subject of these stories into invisible and powerful hitmen, eager to strike fear in adherents and increase dependence on the religious institutions that co-opted them. In this video, we're going to deep dive one of these stories. Consider why, maybe perhaps, it shouldn't be believed. And who knows, maybe lay the groundwork for a demon tier list video in the really near future? I've always wanted to do a tier list video. Low effort trash content. That's where it's at. As of late, this topic has really fascinated me, specifically mainstream Christianity's claims that humankind is under constant assault from these invisible invaders. In fact, it recently occurred to me how much these Christian anecdotes wildly differ in their claims, and how much these demons wildly differ in their efficacy. One demon troubles someone with headaches for years. Another kills a man by turning his head backwards. And yet another creates the largest competitor to Christianity by talking to a guy in a cave 1400 years ago. In fact, this was so fascinating to me that I created a YouTube short poking fun at the topic about 2 months ago. And even the Jehovah's Witnesses, my old religion, are so scared of these dastardly devils, they straight up ban owning and consuming anything that might hint at having to do with the supernatural. Scooby-Doo, the Smurfs, He-Man, Beetlejuice, Casper the Friendly Ghost, who is totally not a dead Richie Rich, kidnapped and eventually murdered because his parents haggled on the ransom. Willow, Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters, Lord of the Rings, a bunch of Disney movies. Anything with astrological signs or references to the zodiac, Ouija boards, magic 8 balls, tarot cards, any items with religious iconography, including pentagrams, depictions of the Virgin Mary or the Holy Spirit, and even the traditional Christian cross. According to Jehovah's Witnesses, all of these are idolatry and associated with false religion, which is under the control of Satan, obviously. Even Michael Jackson, the freaking king of pop, put a disclaimer on his Thriller music video because he was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and he was concerned his production would stir interest in the occult in the minds of his fans. It gets so crazy that many witnesses extend these prohibitions to any items bought from a thrift store or garage sale, on the off chance that they came from a household possessed by demons or contained the aforementioned religious iconography. And no joke, I had a personal friend who would take a pocket knife and scratch the Christian cross off of the label of bottles of Jägermeister he'd buy. Suffice to say, demons are on the minds of Jehovah's Witnesses and Christians in general. So, what exactly is a demon in today's Christian context? According to mainstream Christianity, demons are malevolent supernatural beings, brethren of angels, having fallen after they supported Satan in his rebellion against God, and then were subsequently cast out of heaven. When reading Revelation chapter 12, verse 4, with the context of Revelation chapter 1, verse 20, these fallen angels total 1/3 of all of God's total angels. 1/3! 1/3 of what? The Bible doesn't help us on this, as it never gives us the exact population count for angels. But regardless of that, and also regardless whether the 1/3 should be taken literally or not, it's probably safe to say that whoever penned that passage in Revelation wanted to emphasize that there are a lot of demons. And to really give you an idea of just how powerful even one of these angelic assholes are, all you have to do is take a quick look at 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35, where a tale is spun of a single angel slaughtering 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a single night while they slept. Killing dudes in their sleep. Not cool. Looking at you, Jael. Seriously, never go camping with her. Throughout the Bible and other religiously motivated texts, demons are often depicted as tempters and tormentors of human beings, associated with sin, evil, and invisible spiritual warfare against God, his angels, and his followers. And the sheer number of Christian anecdotes today would be enough to fill several new holy books. These Christian anecdotes are rife with these encounters. Everything from objects moving on their own, bodily assaults, sleep torment, murder, and worst of all, misleading people from the God who created these demons. So for funsies, let's take a look at one of such anecdotes expressed by a Christian who claimed to have experienced firsthand the activities of these malicious marshmallow men. I'm running out of alliterations. I'll probably stop now. And as we go, let's ask ourselves some street epistemology questions along the way. And if you don't know what street epistemology is, that's okay. I plan to make a future video on the subject. But for now, the basics are easy. We're just going to ask some very simple, non-loaded questions about this story and see how those claims hold up to some basic inquiry. Just honest scrutiny. Granted, no one will be answering these questions, or will they? But, well, you'll see. Also, you might want to grab a drink. We're going to really drill into this with a thorough deep dive. I mean, we're going to really squeeze blood from a stone on this one. Anecdote: the demons controlled me and also touched me in my sleep. This one is a blast from my past, as I remember reading this story back when I was a child and finding it quite frightening. For those of you not in the know, this is the Awake magazine, a bi-monthly thing published by the Jehovah's Witnesses via their publishing company, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. This is a magazine that is for the enlightenment of the entire family, as boasted on page 1 of every issue. And this is the August 22nd, 1986 issue, which gives us a 3-page anecdote by a guy named Ralph Anderson, who tells us a shocking tale about his interactions with demons. And while we will be going over the entire story, I'm not going to read it word for word, but if you wish to check it out for yourself later, use the link in the description box below. Just take note of the simple instructions that will be attached to it. The short version goes like this. A self-described sorcerer named Ralph liked the occult and chummy with demons. He did some evil things with demonic help. He studied the Bible and became a Jehovah's Witness. His former demon friends didn't take kindly to this and took to regularly tormenting him, and even the wife he eventually married after the fact. They both prayed a lot. Years passed, and now the demons aren't bothering them as much. That's the short of it. And we're about to go over the long version. As we do this, try to think of some honest and scrutinizing questions for each claim as we go. And my recommendation for your primary line of questioning would be, with this particular claim, what is more plausible or reasonable? A supernatural explanation or a natural explanation? And a bonus question, with this particular claim, how many natural explanations can I come up with to explain it? With that, let's dive in. Ralph Anderson from childhood really liked the occult, so much that he called himself a literal sorcerer. He claims he employed divination, looked for omens, bound others with spells, and practiced black magic and voodoo. He claims instances where he accurately foretold the future.
Before my grandmother died, I knew that her death was imminent, and when a relative would become pregnant, I knew about it before others did. These were not simply hunches that proved true. My knowledge about such things was almost always correct. And when I would wish for a fellow student, teacher, or relative to become sick, invariably, they would.
He once became so upset with his grandmother, he called upon some of his demon buddies to hurt her.
Once, I became upset with my grandmother and wanted her to be hurt. I called to the demons, asking specifically that she should cut herself. That afternoon, she cut herself with a knife.
He also claims to have tortured his brother with a voodoo doll.
Practicing voodoo, I used articles of clothing and made an image of my brother. I wanted to keep him from bothering me. Afterward, whenever he came within 10 feet of me, he got shooting pains in his chest and had difficulty breathing. So he learned to keep away from me.
He also says he foresaw the arrest and release of a drug-dealing acquaintance.
An acquaintance scoffed at my ability to summon the demons. I knew he dealt in drugs, so I told him he would be arrested and then be released. The demons did just what I requested. Within 2 months, the man was arrested. Afterward, the charges were dropped, and he was released. The man never questioned my abilities again.
He goes on to describe how he bound people with spells and befriended demons. So many demons, in fact, that he came to know scores of demons by name. And he says these demons granted him special powers, which he used for evil. He also mentions he had a neglected and battered childhood, was a drunkard and alcoholic, and was also a drug user himself, which may have had something to do with that drug-dealing acquaintance of his, but he doesn't say. A death in the family, his grandmother, the same one he wanted to hurt, I assume, led him to seek religion, and he came into contact with Jehovah's Witnesses. He was impressed by what they thought, studied with them, and eventually decided to join their ranks. And this is where it got really crazy for him. During his process of joining the Witnesses, he claims his old demon friends tormented him to keep him from leaving. This led to instances where they would physically assault him while he tried to sleep.
They would hit me while I was in bed. Once, a blow to the head was so severe that it took hours for the pain to subside. I prayed to Jehovah for help, and after that, he kept them out of my room. However, the demons didn't give up. From outside my bedroom, they would rattle the windows. They kept it up all night, so I could only get a couple hours of sleep. They were trying to wear me down.
He goes on to say that he was convinced that the demons would have killed him if not for God's protection. He eventually formalized his association with the Jehovah's Witnesses by ritual baptism in 1975. He also married a Jehovah's Witness woman named Mari, whom the demons took to tormenting as well.
Even after Mary and I were married, the demons harassed us, terrifying my wife on occasion.
Finally, he speaks about how an unspecified amount of years had to pass before they experienced relief from the problem, though he only goes as far as to say he was
no longer experiencing direct harassment from the demons.
Wow, powerful stuff. Or is it? Well, as a child, with my formative years spent listening to this tale and others in the Watchtower publications, I was quite scared of the implications of these stories. Demons could get me anytime, anywhere. And even if I prayed to God for my protection, they would still be able to affect me negatively. This can be quite traumatizing for kids. So how can we tell if this story is true or not? Well, unfortunately, like many stories from decades ago, chances are extremely low, if at all, that we'll be able to find ourselves a definite answer to this question. In fact, even if the story was more recent, say published this year, 2023, there's still a very low chance that we'd be able to reach a definite conclusion. And I'd be dishonest if I were to tell you that this story is 100% false, or even mostly false, as I don't have the evidence to show that. This is the general problem with unfalsifiable claims, since by definition, they cannot be falsified. They cannot be shown to be false. This is another topic I plan to create a video on in the future, so stay on the lookout for that. In cases like this, rather than focusing on reaching that definitive true or false answer on the overall veracity of the claim, as nice as that would be, we should instead analyze the plausibility of this story by scrutinizing 3 things. 1. The publisher of these claims, the Watchtower Society and Jehovah's Witnesses. 2. the source of these claims, Ralph Anderson. And 3, the individual claims themselves, independent of the Watchtower Society or Mr. Anderson. And we can use street epistemology questions to help determine how plausible each claim is. It is of note, though, while this method usually involves an interviewer to ask questions and an interviewee to provide answers, we'll have to forego the latter and just do our best to provide those answers ourselves. Part 1, The Watchtower. Let's first look at the magazine itself, The Awake, and see what we can determine as to its trustworthiness. Naturally, the writers of the magazine itself were not there when the events Ralph claims to have happened. So the only concern we have with them is to examine how confident we can be that The Awake magazine has conveyed this story to us accurately. Here are some basic questions we can ask to explore this. What would the Watchtower Society have to gain if the reader were to believe this story? Jehovah's Witnesses are a small, Christian, isolationist, doomsday preaching religion, of which a core belief is that the entire world is under the control of Satan and his demonic forces. And since the Jehovah's Witnesses are God's one and only true organization, naturally, this means they believe they are prime targets for these demons. They also believe they need to preach and convert as many people as possible before Armageddon strikes. And they employ fear tactics like this to do so. Anecdotes like this, and bizarre hypotheticals like the bunker video, which you can watch on YouTube. I'll put a link below for that, in fact. Check it out, but only after you're finished watching this video, of course. Indeed, a story like this, if believed by the reader, feared by the reader, goes a long way to convince that person to believe the other things the Watchtower Society says. This would increase the generation of new followers, bolstering their ranks. And as for existing followers, they would be less inclined to leave the organization, for fear they would also become targets of demons themselves. Would Watchtower's objectives reduce their motivation to reliably relay the story to us? If you were to ask a Jehovah's Witness what was more important, maximizing the number of people saved from Armageddon for God's glory, or ensuring that every word of an anecdote published in their magazine was accurate, which do you think they would choose? Jehovah's Witness leadership have several times stated that the exaltation of God's name is of paramount importance. So much so that God authorizes a strategy called theocratic warfare. Theocratic warfare is another term for withholding information, misleading or deceiving others, or even lying in order to advance the interests of their religion. Links to articles about this concept are below in the description. With that in mind, could the writers of this article have decided to massage the story to be more coherent with their doctrine? Perhaps omit certain details they find problematic, or maybe fabricate details in the story to make it more convincing, or the worst possibility of all, simply manufacture the anecdote wholesale, including this individual Ralph Anderson. After all, what's a lie when compared to maximizing God's glory? We don't know the answer to these questions, and I'm not accusing the Watchtower Society of lying in this article. I have no idea. The point is that all of these natural explanations are plausible, reasonable explanations for the story. After all, we have countless confirmed examples of humans being genuinely mistaken, misremembering details, omitting important facts, and even lying. Compare that to how many confirmed demon encounters we know of. Hint, it's 0. So again, what's more plausible? The supernatural exists, or the people at Watchtower back in the 1980s fudge some details to supposedly save lives? What is the magazine's editorial practices? We actually have very little idea of the process that goes into turning an anecdote like this into a printed story. We have 0 visibility on Watchtower's fact-checking process, if they even have one. No names are linked to the production of the magazine or their other publications. There's no editor listed, no writers, no list of fact-checkers, no credentials, nothing, all anonymous. In fact, I'm unable to name you even a single person who works in the Watchtower writing department, neither then nor now. And if you were to request names from the organization of who wrote this article, you'd be hard-pressed to make them comply. On top of this, the Jehovah's Witness religion has gone through numerous doctrinal revisions since their formation back in the late 19th century. They routinely remove old publications from their website and library and essentially decommission them with the label Old Light. In other words, they retire their past writings, which they declare no longer accurately represent their beliefs. I'll bet you a voodoo doll the day will come when even this issue, the focus of today's video, will be removed from their website due to becoming obsolete against the current state of their doctrines. Does the magazine rely on reputable sources? Well, in this case, we've got Ralph. What do we know about him? It's nothing. Virtually nothing. Outside of his first and last name, assuming it's not a pseudonym, we don't have any additional information to help us track down Ralph and verify his story. No middle name, no phone number, no address, no age, not even a photo of him. We probably have his birth city, San Francisco, but he only says his parents moved there before he was born, so that doesn't necessarily mean he was actually born there. And since the article is from the 1980s, we obviously can't ask for an email address or website or Twitter account. We have virtually no way to verify that he made these claims, even if we were back in 1986. And his story supposedly took place 50 years ago in the 1970s. It's likely he's no longer even alive now. Good luck interviewing him. So there's the magazine, and there are numerous unanswered questions and problems associated with it. So many, I'd argue that we could dismiss the story outright here and now. Unsubstantiated nonsense. So we're done, right? Well, that'd be too easy. Part 2. Ralph Anderson.
As you can see, we've had our eye on you for some time now, Mr. Anderson.
So, for the sake of the rest of this discussion, let's just say that this particular Wake magazine article is accurate and justly conveys to us this anecdote as given by a real Ralph Anderson. That is, Ralph Anderson does exist, his words were accurately recorded, and we're confident that the Watchtower Society perfectly preserved and delivered this story to us in their magazine. The entire chain of custody of the story, from Ralph's mouth to the printed page, was reliable and trustworthy. Let's even go a step further and say that the good people at Watchtower were gracious enough to break protocol and give us Ralph's contact information, and we were able to talk to him directly today. What would we ask him? Ralph, how do you know what you experienced was actually a demon? Have you considered the possibility that what you experienced might have been hallucinations, a series of psychotic breaks during your youth, or a product of your self-admitted drug use? Have you considered the possibility of false or muddled memories, a product of your imagination where you yourself don't realize? Have you encountered other people who have had similar experiences, but attributed it to something other than a demon or the supernatural? Have you encountered someone else who had similar experiences, but joined a different religion and experienced the same relief via some different god? Ralph, for a moment, let's pretend you're incorrect in attributing what you experienced to demons. What are some other possible explanations for what you experienced? How many natural explanations can you account for these events? In other words, how would you falsify the idea that these were demons? And lastly, Ralph, how are we supposed to know that you aren't just fabricating this entire story? After all, we have many examples of people spinning elaborate tales for all kinds of reasons. Attention, fame, getting out of trouble, getting into trouble, covering up crimes, the raw thrill of deception. What evidence can you present to us to show what you're saying is true? It would be nice to have Ralph here to answer these questions. But even though he's not, we can look at these questions and understand what kind of holes and contradictions we discover in these claims. This is street epistemology, and it is an excellent strategy when talking to religious preachers and apologists. It fascinates me, and I totally dig it. Part 3, the story. Let's take a look at the story itself and field our own questions. Maybe even hopefully we'll discover some natural explanations for these events. I've compiled all of the supernatural claims Ralph laid out in his story. Let's go through them one by one. And to keep myself from repeating the same thing over and over again, let's just get the following out of the way now. For all the supernatural claims in the story, the most common and plausible explanations are coincidences, hallucinations, genuine mistakenness, false memories, outright lies. These explanations are plausible, obvious, boring. So let's explore some other natural explanations that may not so readily come to mind.
A demon provided me knowledge of things that could not be known by ordinary means. These are not simply hunches that prove true. My knowledge about such things was almost always correct.
Ralph admits he wasn't 100% accurate, which means he was wrong at least sometimes. I wonder what his ratio of correct to incorrect predictions were. Could perhaps confirmation bias be at play here? Could Ralph be remembering the hits and ignoring the misses, either honestly or dishonestly? This is a well-known and common logical oversight, with the teller of the tale being especially susceptible.
Before my grandmother died, I knew that her death was imminent.
It's safe to say that many people are able to anticipate when the death of an elderly loved one is approaching, even without supernatural powers. In many cases, we see clear indicators in the form of declining health, reduced movement, sluggish or erratic behavior, slurred speech, and a general decline in cognition. Even the elderly person themselves might be expressing sentiments and belief that their time is almost up and they might be dying soon. Also, we all die. There's nothing special in thinking that an elderly person will die sooner rather than later. You will eventually be right about it. You just have to wait. And darker still, Ralph did mention how he considered himself to be an evil person and petitioned demons to harm his grandmother and other family members. With this modus operandi, it's maybe a little possible that Ralph killed her himself. I'm not saying he did, but what I am saying is that it's more plausible than demons. Ralph killing his grandmother is a poor, shitty, long shot explanation, but it is still better, more plausible than the supernatural.
When a relative would become pregnant, I knew about it before others did.
Again, there's no supernatural powers needed here. Like with an elderly person dying, there's recognizable patterns of behavior from a couple trying for a child. Many couples express that they're attempting to have children in casual conversation with friends, family, and workmates. Some go out of their way to mention it many times. Perhaps the couple recently bought a larger house or minivan in expectation for an expanding family. Maybe one or both parents recently got a pay raise or a better job, financially elevating them to the point of being able to support children. And on top of that, most couples that do go for children are of a certain age range. If one were to predict a couple will have a child, chances of success and accuracy would drastically increase if that prediction is leveraged at a pair of 20-somethings rather than a couple beyond their mid-40s. And who knows, maybe Ralph knew of a couple or two not using protection and just made an educated guess. Silly, I know, but more plausible than demons.
When I would wish for a fellow student, teacher, or relative to become sick, invariably they would.
We all become sick from one time or another, some more frequently than others. I personally get sick probably once a year from cold or flu, and I suffer from migraines, usually self-inflicted when I disrupt my rate of caffeine intake, or I do something really stupid like drink beer and eat donuts at the same time. I get a sweet tooth when I'm buzzed. I can't help it. In fact, I'm gonna make a prediction right now that you, the viewer, will get sick in the near future. Once you catch a cold, does that mean I'm in league with the demons? I hope we can agree that it doesn't.
Once, I became upset with my grandmother and wanted her to be hurt. I called to the demons, asking specifically that she should cut herself. That afternoon, she cut herself with a knife.
Perhaps after making this petition, he waited until she was preparing food and was eager to see his demonic request answered. Maybe he engaged with her in conversation or even an argument while she was chopping vegetables or meat, presenting a distraction which caused her to slip and cut herself. Maybe he rigged the knife to detach from the handle and increase the risk of injury. I think it's safe to say, with his admitted attitude towards his grandmother and his own admission that he was a hateful person, he wouldn't be above this. And when he says he cut herself, how bad was it? A close call? A nick? A scrape? A cut? First aid needed? Suspiciously, no helpful details are given.
Practicing voodoo, I used articles of clothing and made an image of my brother. I wanted to keep him from bothering me. Afterward, whenever he came within 10 feet of me, he got shooting pains in his chest and had difficulty breathing. So he learned to keep away from me.
There's a couple of possible explanations here that I can see off the bat. The first is that the brother might have been a believer himself, and as such, was primed to believe that voodoo dolls are real and effective. Knowing and seeing his brother use a voodoo doll of his likeness, he may have imagined actual pain in his chest. I know when I watch a movie or TV show or play a video game, and there's some type of major bodily harm done to a character, I can certainly feel that sensation of pain in my own body. It's not really there, but my brain thinks it is. Or another explanation, which I lean towards more, would be that this brother doesn't actually believe in voodoo magic and acted like he was hurt in order to mock his brother. After all, Ralph is such a swell guy. I'd certainly mock him if he was my sibling. I'd have a laugh at the fact he thought he was actually causing me harm as he stabbed his little dolly.
An acquaintance scoffed at my ability to summon the demons. I knew he dealt in drugs, so I told him he would be arrested and then be released. The demons did just what I requested. Within 2 months, the man was arrested. Afterward, the charges were dropped, and he was released. The man never questioned my abilities again.
So this one is fun. Is it really uncommon for drug dealers to get arrested and even later released? Suffice to say, those that engage in criminal activities, especially activities that involve interaction with other people in a public and unlawful way, will drastically increase their odds of getting arrested. And on top of this, Ralph admitted he himself used drugs. Was this his drug dealer? This acquaintance? Could they maybe have had a disagreement over money? Disagreement over quality or quantity of the product? Could Ralph, in anger, have made this prediction come true himself by calling the police on the dealer himself? What's more plausible, the demons called the police or Ralph did?
I began using these names when I spoke with them, and it seemed that whenever I dealt with a particular demon, that one's personality and the way he worked differed from that of other demons I would call upon. I thus came to know scores of demons by name.
Today, we have all manner of mental illness where imaginary voices can be heard by an individual. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and more rarely but not impossible, post-traumatic stress disorder and even depression. Ralph did express he had a battered childhood after all. Is it possible that he suffered from one of these conditions? And this story takes place in the 1970s, 50 years ago. We had much less sophisticated mental health care and medications back then. But even then, the following issue of the Awake magazine, the one that came right after this one, I kid you not, is titled Hope for the Mentally Ill, and it talks about these things. Here's a direct quote about a schizophrenic sufferer named Jerry. His speech is a disjointed mixture of fear and delusion. Inner voices terrorize him. His is a brain running amok. Hallucinations, inner voices, disordered thinking, irrational fears, and emotions that seem out of tune with reality. Does this remind you of somebody? And as a side note, I find it massively disingenuous that the Awake magazine didn't mention these possibilities in this article, but then had a whole freaking cover story on it in the next article. Link in the description. Jesus Christ, you can't make this up. And barring all that, hearing voices in one's head does not necessarily indicate a mental illness. It can and does occur in people without these conditions. It's rare, but possible. I'm no mental health doctor, and even if I was, I wouldn't be able to diagnose him because he's not here. These are just possibilities from my clumsy research. But what I can say is that any of these explanations, no matter how far-fetched, are more plausible than the supernatural.
They would hit me while I was in bed. Once, a blow to the head was so severe that it took hours for the pain to subside. I prayed to Jehovah for help, and after that, he kept them out of my room. However, the demons didn't give up. From outside my bedroom, they would rattle the windows. They kept it up all night, so I could only get a couple hours of sleep. They were trying to wear me down.
Again, this can be explained by all kinds of mental and physical conditions, migraines and psychosis. Nothing new and unique or demonic, especially with our medical knowledge today. And let's assume the rattling windows was a real thing, was actually happening. How can we explain that? Wind? Neighborhood pranksters? Animals? All more plausible than demons.
Even after Mary and I were married, the demons harassed us, terrifying my wife on occasion.
This is the last supernatural claim, and I find this one to be so interesting because it's a damning indictment against his idea of a god. Even after getting baptized and supposedly putting all of his mystical practices behind him, with years going by, he claims he was still tormented by demons. In fact, in the previous claim, when he called upon God to help him when he tried to sleep, his God was only able or willing to simply move the demons outside the bedroom, where they could still rattle the windows. Not enough to provide real relief and allow the guy to get some rest. And even years later, with his wife, who, as far as we know, never participated in his occult activities, also suffer from demonic disturbances. This is probably explained by the fact his wife was also a fellow believer and thus primed to believe that demonic torment was a thing, and being associated with him would perhaps open her up to it. But there's bigger questions here. Why would this god only provide partial relief to the problem? Why did it take years to get to the point where he was no longer experiencing direct harassment? Is his God unable to completely solve the problem? Is his God unwilling to completely solve the problem? Perhaps to teach him a lesson, even at the expense of his innocent wife? Or maybe, just maybe, it's all imagined. And even though he joined a religion, the underlying problems with his worldview, mind, and outlook were never properly addressed or mended. And that's the end of the story. The ultimate point being that all of these claims, every single one, can easily be explained by natural answers and known reality. No demons required. For a bonus to really drive home this point, here's one more much shorter anecdote. And this one is a real story, as told to me by a family I used to know in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I'm reporting this to you. Kind of like how the Watchtower reported Ralph's story to us. See the parallels? Got your questions ready? 30 years ago, there was a family that lived in the same neighborhood that I did, back when I was a preteen. All were members of the Jehovah's Witness religion. It was a middle-aged husband, his wife, and some teenage children, all living in the same home down the hill from me. One day, the mother was home alone. The husband was at work and the children were at school. She was cleaning the kitchen and she noticed that one of her shelf decorations, a vase, was out of position and rotated backwards. Thinking one of her family members, perhaps a recent guest maybe, might have moved it, she simply corrected its position and rotated it back into place. She then continued on with her day. Less than an hour later, she found the vase once again moved out of place and rotated exactly into the position she had originally found it. She knew she wasn't the one that did this, and she was immediately terrified. Fearful demons were in her home that moment, and overcome with terror, she screamed and fled the house. Terrified of re-entering, she went to her neighbor's home and called her husband at work, frantically exclaiming that there was a demon in the house. He rushed home, ready to destroy the vase and remove the supposed cause of the problem. So, what do you think actually happened here? Was it demons? Or is there a naturalistic explanation which could account for these events? In fact, here's a video showing a similar occurrence with an Egyptian idol in a museum. Notice how it spins on its own. I'll replay this on high speed a few times so you can take a look. Creepy, right? Well, not really. Notice how the idol only spins when there's human activity nearby. People walking, doors opening and closing, the case being touched, and so on. While this video doesn't prove that demons aren't at play here, it gives us a much more plausible and naturalistic explanation. Vibrations from nearby human movement, along with unconformities in the glass and base of the idol, is causing the idol to spin in place. And as you probably guessed it, that's exactly what's happening in my anecdote. As the wife worked, she was listening to music on a nearby high-end speaker and subwoofer system. In fact, it was installed in the same bookshelf that the vase was. The vibrations produced by the audio system, combined with irregularities in the shelf and the vase, caused the vase to slowly but surely move. No demons. The husband, to his credit, figured this out pretty quick and explained it to his spouse, but they were both still a little freaked out about it, so they got rid of the vase anyway. Go fig. Now, if I were to circulate this story without that final explanation, what conclusions do you think those already primed to believe demons would reach? Well, demon activity, most likely. And how far do you think a story like that would have proliferated? How many people do you think would have jumped on the supernatural explanation while there was a perfectly reasonable natural explanation sitting just outside of consideration? Can you imagine how someone primed to already believe tales like this would read that story uncritically and then start to circulate it? And the same goes for this Awake magazine article. Garbage, an unsubstantiated story, suspiciously lacking necessary detail and elaboration, aimed towards an audience already primed to believe. So let's close up. Always keep a skeptical mind. Ask questions to unpack the story being pitched to you. Because once you are convinced to believe the absurd or the spectacular, you can then be convinced of anything. Essential oils, a flat earth, creationism, and demons. Should you be scared of demons and stories? Creatures that flee in the face of rigorous inquiry and systematic investigation? Rendered powerless in the face of clinical therapy and antipsychotic drugs? Only you can decide for yourself. But the answer is no. Whoa, okay, friends, thank you. That's it for this one. Appreciate you sticking around with me to the end. This was a long one, but it was really fun to tackle. And like I said, this story frightened me when I was a child, so it was cathartic to tear it to pieces. So before I sign off, a couple of announcements. First of all, I want to invite people to connect to me on Twitter. My handle is @SkepticsScound, and you can find a link to my profile down below in the description. Also, I hinted at in the intro, I have a Patreon account set up now. If you like this content and wish to support future productions, please check it out and consider contributing. If not, that's cool too. I plan to make you videos regardless. And finally, my next video will be a tier list based on the tales of demons from the Bible. Let's pit these bad guys against each other, one-on-one combat, and see who should get the Demonic Employee of the Month award down in hell. It'll be fun. Please like, share, and subscribe. With that, have a nice day. See ya.